Welcome to Less Clutter, More You, a podcast that travels with you through the journey of letting go and creating order so you can start making more room for what matters most. Together, we'll go beyond the basket to start unlocking your next level of embracing your physical and mental space through mindset shifts and action steps. I'm your host, Maggie Britton, professional organizer, clutter coach, wife, and mom of four, and I am so glad you are here. Hello and welcome back to all of our listeners. I'm really excited today to welcome Kate House from right across the river. So if you're local, she's right in Pennsylvania. And so much of starting to live with less clutter and more you, and really embracing that as a lifestyle is the habits, the behavior change. And lucky for us, that is exactly what Kate does with her Live by Design programs, her community, her podcast. She lives and breathes this, creating habits that are supporting a lifestyle that you want, that you have curated, that you are designing for you. So Kate, can you give us a little background? I would love to know, how was it that, behavior change and habits really caught your focus and how you got started in this?
Oh, well, Maggie, thank you so much for having me. Hello to your community. I'm so glad to be here. Yes, I was not born this little unicorn that was like, let me be a behavior change specialist. In fact, I was basically my first client. So I woke up at 25 and I'd been, the type A, graduated Phi Beta Kappa from college, classic oldest child, perfectionist, people pleaser, right? And I ticked all the boxes that were expected of me. And I woke up one day and was like, I am stressed. I don't love my day that's ahead of me. I used to think about okay, can I take a sick day today? I loved my colleagues. The work I was doing did not light me up. And I realized, I jokingly call it a quarter life crisis, but I realized oh, I've been living into all of the shoulds, all the things I thought were expected of me by people in my life, by society, by culture, all these things. And I have this very distinct memory at 25 of my husband and I were living in Chicagoland at the time. We had my parents' old leather couch. I was sitting on this couch and I remember talking with him and just crying and being I don't know what to do. I'm not loving my job. And he was so sweet and he was rubbing my back. And in that moment, I realized oh my gosh, I'm the one who has to make a shift. Because he was rubbing my back and he was like, I wish I could make this better. And that's when I was like, oh, it's on me.
Wow.
And that's exciting and terrifying all at the same time.
Yes. Yes.
And so that was kind of when I realized one, nothing changes if nothing changes. And two, when I'm not changing, I'm choosing. And that was the harder reality of okay, I don't want to wake up and choose to feel this way any longer. And my hope is that because I did a total 180 with my life, and my hope is to help other women recognize some of these warning signs a lot earlier and do a series of 1-degree shifts over time and not have to totally crash and burn like I did. But through that process, I learned how to trust myself to take the next right step. So I became a yoga teacher and I loved teaching yoga. I loved managing a studio. And then my students wanted to work with me in a more robust way. And so then I became a holistic health coach. And then we started our family and I was like, wow, I can't be in the studio all the time. So I started my podcast because that was the next right step, right? And now I host virtual summits and I get to have conversations like the one we're having today. And I'm working on writing my first book. And all of this has just been getting in tune with what I actually want out of life, not what my parents want, not what, we're told we should, quote, should want, deciding what's actually important to me, what I want to pursue, and doing it in a really meaningful way. So that's a very long answer to your question of this is kind of how I got to be a behavior change specialist and a top podcaster and somebody who just feels super passionately about helping other women live with intention and joy and pursue goals with soul, but not at the expense of your day-to-day experience of life.
Well, you are in the right place because those are all the things that we love to embrace. So what I appreciate you sharing was that, you had someone willing to help you,
Mm-hmm.
but you recognized that even with their help, your choices, your actions is what was going to make the long-term change.
Yeah.
And so often when people have found me, they're at a point of overwhelm.
Mm-hmm.
The clutter has become too much. It is affecting their day-to-day. It is affecting their mood. It is affecting their relationships and their ability to show up to life as their best version. And when they get to me, they have realized something has to change, and they know it is something that they're doing or not doing, and that they need help with that. So I am so glad you're here to help all of us with that, because I know that beyond the physical clutter, we can apply this to all of our forms of clutter, our mental clutter, our schedule. Like you were saying, you were in different directions. You couldn't do it all. Relationship clutter, finding the things that fill you up with joy and personalizing that to what your intentions for life are. So thank you for sharing that, because if you can just get to that point and recognize something has to change, and now here's Kate, and she's going to help us realize what we can do to actually really make that change. So if someone was just starting, let's say they're the point where you were,
Mm-hmm.
you're feeling burnout, you're overwhelmed, and they're ready to make that shift. Where in the world do you start, right? Because there's so many things that you could change that all contribute to the success or the failure. Not that we ever are failing, but just something not working as well as we wanted to, I should say. So where can they start to curb and redirect that behavior to make it work for them?
Oh, Maggie, I love this question. Yeah. So I've created something called the Live by Design Blueprint. I like to say, because you are the architect of your extraordinary life. My last name is House. I love a good pun. So we've got the blueprint, you get to be the architect. And so what I've done is I kind of looked back over 10 years of growth, of evolution, of trying, of failing forward, and created this blueprint. And so what I like to do is start from the top down. So the place that I would recommend somebody who's like, my gosh, I feel so overwhelmed, I'm pulled in a million different directions, I say yes to everything, I would say, let's start with your annual intention. Now we're recording this on a Tuesday. So friends, you can set annual intention on a Tuesday in the last quarter of the year, right? You can do it on a Wednesday in April, right? It doesn't matter what day it is. I think sometimes the first thing we need to kind of realize is that we don't have to wait for January 1st or the first of the month or a Monday. It's just, what do you want for yourself in the next 12 months? And I like to say that an intention, it's not something measurable. Like there isn't something that you're like, I have succeeded at this. Instead, it's a feeling. So how do you want to feel over the next 12 months? Are you on a decluttering journey? Do you want to feel calm? Do you want to feel present? Do you want to feel energized? My word this year is empowered. So every decision I make through the lens of, will this contribute to me feeling empowered? And it makes it a lot easier to know what to say yes to and what to say thank you, but no to. And sometimes if you're like, well, Kate, I don't actually know what I want, right? Like so many of us women, we pour so much of ourselves into our families, into our careers, into our partners, and whatever it might be. And we wake up one day and we're like, I don't even know what I like anymore, right? So you can even take this from the opposite approach of like, well, I don't want to feel, for me, like coming up with the word empowered, part of that is feeling energized in my body. And so I kind of started out of like, I don't want to feel tired. Like I was so tired of people being like, how do you feel? And I would be like, tired. I think that was my answer for like 5 years. And I was like, okay, if I don't want to feel empowered, what would be a more positive spin on that? Because I don't want your annual intention to be like, not tired or not disorganized or not cluttered, right? We want to make it something positive. So flip it on the other side. I want to feel energized. I want to feel organized. I want to feel calm, whatever that word is for you. That's where I would start, is thinking about this annual intention, this feeling that you desire for yourself, because that then allows us to set goals and then to turn those goals into habits.
That's great. And so if you are new to even this podcast and not even just new to Kate and you're new to me, the framework that we work off of in the online programs and even our in-person, just repeatable process is the COCO framework. And that is clearing our mindset, clearing our space. And a lot of that is really getting intentional. What do we want? And then we get into the organize, and then we get into contain and curate. And then there's the big O, for the lack of a better word, at the very end. And that is often. And often represents everything we're doing to support what we started with. We started on this journey for a reason. We started to declutter. We started to get organized because we wanted, as Kate said, to feel something. So we're starting, we get those intentions. And if you're driving, as you're thinking of this, if you are doing housework, if you are taking a walk, pause for a second. Pause this episode and take 5 minutes to think about what is it that Kate was just suggesting. What is it that you want to feel a year from now? And I love that it's a year. I like that time frame because it's gentle, but it's also let's get into action, right? Yeah. So pause the podcast, take some time, find quiet space in your head and think about those intentions and then come back. Because Kate, from those intentions, from the action that we're starting to take, a lot of that is creating new habits to support these intentions, to support our new goals. I know that you have that, the Goals with Souls Summit. And I love that, right? Because if we can bring the soul, the real true us, our true self that's hiding under the clutter, and I know it's there because I've seen you as listeners, clients reclaim that self. What are these habits that we're creating and we're building to support that? So Kate, I know that you have 2 types of habits. So can you talk about those 2 types of habits that we are really going to try to add into and weave into our day-to-day life?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. So, we're starting with that intention. From there, we set some goals with soul, which can be a whole other conversation. But basically, a goal with soul is something that's aspirational, attainable, meaningful to you personally, and seasonally appropriate to where you are in life right now. And then because, so many of us high achievers, we want everything done and we want it done yesterday. And so seasonally appropriate, I think is really important to remember. And then we take that down into our habits. So when I think of an intention, it's an annual intention. When I think of a goal with soul, it's usually quarterly. It's 3 to 6 months in length. And that is something that is attainable. That's something that's measurable that keeps us moving forward. But then how do we move forward to actually achieve that goal with soul? It's in the habits. So yeah, the 2 ways that I would say are a great way to get started with taking regular action, right? Because action creates clarity. Action is what moves us forward, is both habit stacking and habit pairing. So first, let's just talk about what is a habit. A habit is something that you do without having to think about it. So every night when I come upstairs to go to bed, a habit of mine is that I brush my teeth, right? I don't have to think about it. I just go into the bathroom and I do it. And there was actually a study by, I think it was Duke, that like 70% of our day is done in habits. So habits that support the way you want to feel, habits that maybe don't support the way that you want to feel. Part of this process is just creating awareness around it. Like, oh, isn't that interesting? Every night when I sit down to watch TV, I pour a glass of wine. Nothing wrong with a glass of wine, but is that going to support me in feeling empowered tomorrow when I want to do my morning routine, right? Is it going to make me feel a little tired or sluggish? So it just gives us that moment of like, oh, maybe that's something I don't need to do every night. Maybe that's something I save for a weekend when I'm enjoying a glass of wine with my friends, right? This could be anything. So it's just thinking about these habits, what supports the way you want to feel, what doesn't, and choosing what those habits get to be going forward. So a habit starts with a cue. The cue is just the thing that tells you like it's time to do this habit. That could be like walking through a specific doorway in your house. That could be a certain time of day. It could be when an alarm goes off on your phone, right? I have medicine that I take every day at 9 a.m. I would not remember to take it at 9 a.m., but my alarm goes off and I take it, right? So that's the cue. The action of the habit is the activity itself, right? So it's the taking of the medicine. It's the meditation practice. It's going for the walk. It's doing the thing that is moving you closer to achieving your goal with soul, that supports you feeling the way you want to feel, aka your intention, right? So if I'm doing a habit that helps me feel empowered, that might look like going to the gym and moving my body from a place of joy. And my cue and action is my cue as I drop my kids off at school. The action is I drive to my alma mater and I go work out. And then the reward is the thing that keeps you coming back time and time again. It's how you feel when the thing is done. So do I love lifting weights? Not particularly, but I love the way I feel in my body afterwards. I love the way I feel strong or accomplished or empowered, right? So if the habit is a cue, an action, and a reward, there are different things we can do to really maximize the impact of it. So the first is with a habit stack. Habit stack is simply taking one habit and then linking another habit to it. So if you have a habit that, and I would recommend that this first one is one that's already established. So for example, I am a coffee drinker. I love coffee. I think I started loving coffee even more when I had kids. And so every morning I come downstairs and I start the coffee maker. And when I start the coffee maker, which is a habit, that is something I'm going to do come like hell or high water, or an electrical outage perhaps might stop me from it. But I do that every day. And so then it's really a great opportunity to habit stack from there. So when I hit the brew button, then perhaps one of the habits that I want is if I want to feel calmer or more present in my day, perhaps I start brewing the coffee and then I take 5 really mindful breaths. So that's the habit stack. The second habit then becomes some mindful breathing. So the cue for that second habit, the breathing, is starting the coffee, which we're already going to do anyways. The action are the mindful breaths. And then the reward is feeling a little calmer, a little more present, a little bit more in tune with yourself and less reactionary to the world around you. And so that would be an example of a habit stack. The other thing I love to teach is habit pairing. Because so many of us, we wear a lot of hats. We're doing a lot of things all at once. And while monotasking, like doing one thing at a time, is really wonderful to do if you're working on something that's novel, so something that requires a lot of attention or a lot of skill, or you're learning, you're new at it, absolutely monotask that bad boy. But we can multitask things that we are doing repetitively, things that we're like, I could empty my dishwasher in my sleep practically, right? So those are opportunities to habit pair. So something that you can do 2 things at once. So for example, the desk I'm talking to you from is a sit stand desk. I love this desk. It was not expensive. It's from Amazon. Like none of this this doesn't have to be so difficult, right? So I got this desk for Christmas last year. I also bought myself a walking pad when it was on sale for Prime Days, right? And so one thing that I like to do, like this morning when I was preparing for our time together, Maggie, was I put my desk in stand mode, grabbed my little walking pad, and I habit paired. So the habit of work, of pouring into this work that I love to do, I paired that with some movement because I woke up kind of tired today. I was like, I don't actually really want to go to the gym and lift weights today. Like I'm tired. I want to listen to my body. And so I was like, okay, I can still do my movement. I'm just going to do it at a really leisurely 2 miles per hour on my walking pad while I prepare for our time together. So you can do these habit pairs, or if you have a goal of educating yourself on a certain topic, grab an audiobook, put it in your earbuds and listen to that while you're emptying the dishwasher, or folding the laundry is another great thing that you can habit pair with, right? Because like we don't have to think a lot when we're folding the laundry. So that's a great time to tune into Less Clutter, More You. That's a great time to listen to an audiobook. That can be a great time to just be really mindful and be present with yourself if that is one of your goals, right? And so I like these 2 approaches because there's something that you can start to implement right away, but it's something that gets to build over time. So for example, with the habit stack, you started with your coffee, you added the mindful breathing. Once that starts to come really naturally to you, once it's no longer something you have to think about and it's just a habit, it's part of who you are, you can add something else onto it. So maybe you're like, you know what, after I start the coffee and I take my mindful breaths, I'm going to create a really nutrient-dense breakfast for myself. Right? And so they get to build off of each other and create this really beautiful kind of virtuous cycle that keeps feeding us and keeps supporting us in feeling the way we want to feel through these little actions every day.
That's perfect. And something that each of those different ways to create those habits, to build the habits, to start new habits, to keep the other habits going. Your examples were so good, and something that most people are doing, right? Like we're brushing our teeth, we're doing our laundry, we're setting the coffee. So those are all things that are great places to start. You're doing them anyway. So what I could see that happening in terms of your space is like, what are you touching, right? Like you said, you're touching the coffee maker, you're turning that on. Can you look in the drawer below that at that same time and see if there's something that you no longer need? Like you're not using that coffee anymore. Like those little things that you're already doing, that's a great way to just take the action because we love action around here. So what would you say if we're starting these habits and we find that we fall off the boat a little bit, right? To get back on that habit, because this is what happens a lot of times when people are coming to me. They say, I've never been this way. I don't know. Some people have always lived a life of more clutter and have dealt with more disorganization than others. And then others, it's a season of life and they're like, this, I don't know, it just got away from me. I wasn't able to keep up. How do you suggest, like, we know everyone who's listening, they are busy bees, right? How do we suggest that when it's like, oh, I can't add another thing, Kate, how could I possibly add another thing? What would you say to them to just encourage them to stay on track, to get back on track?
Yes, I would say maybe two things. So one is that James Clear teaches us in the book Atomic Habits, never miss twice. And I find that to be so helpful because a lot of times habits are taught from this very masculine perspective, but never miss twice for me allows there to be days where like my kid woke up with a stomach bug, and like my whole day is thrown out the wazoo, right? And the habits don't happen because I'm like in mom mode. And that's okay, right? Like there are going to be days that you can't plan for. But this idea of never miss twice is like, okay, well, now we know we have a sick kid at home and maybe potentially tomorrow too. So with that knowledge now, how can we not miss twice, right? How can we still do the thing? Maybe we scale it back. Maybe it's for a smaller amount of time. But how can we still show up and keep that kind of muscle memory of doing that activity? The other thing that I would encourage you to think about is asking yourself, like, if you're in that place where you're like, I can't add one more thing, but you do have this desire for a shift or for a change, is to think about what area of life, if it were different, would have the biggest impact on your day, biggest positive impact, right? So, for example, my pantry right now, my gosh, I wish we lived even closer, Maggie, because my pantry is a pain point for me right now. We did not build this house. We moved into it. The pantry is not what I would have designed, and it's not great. And it gives me this kind of just low level of stress every time I open up the pantry door. So for me, if I were feeling like stuck and I were like, I just want to feel a little bit better, I want to feel a little less overwhelmed, addressing my pantry would be the number one way for me to feel better. And so ask yourself, like, okay, is it, and a lot of times, like, we need to go back to basics. It's like, am I getting enough sleep? Am I drinking enough water? You guys can't see me, but I have a massive water bottle right next to me. Am I moving my body from just a place of joy, of wanting to move my body for the sake of movement, right? Do I have quality connections in my life? Are there relationships that I am nurturing and leaning into? And a lot of times, if we can kind of take it back to these basics, get those feeling really good, then we can move on and have greater capacity to do some of these bigger goals or these bigger projects, right? And so by nurturing ourselves, we get to then nurture all these other areas. And I guess my last thing would be never underestimate the power of a 10-minute timer. Like,
absolutely.
You can do so much in 10 minutes.
You can.
You don't even know. So just set that timer and just like be a whirling dervish for 10 minutes. And then when the timer goes off, give yourself permission to be like, that was great. And now I'm done. And you're 10 minutes farther along on your journey than you were before. And you will be amazed at what you can do. Like, I can do most of my kitchen in 10 minutes. And I'm like, oh, that was a lot worse in my head than it actually was.
Yes. Yes. Everything. And that's what I like to suggest sometimes is just doing these time audits. How long does it actually take you?
Yeah.
Because at the end of the day, it's never like I avoid my laundry like the plague. And I am like, Maggie, you timed this already. You know it's 2 to 3 minutes. So when I tell myself that, and I have a little saying that it's, come on, Mag, come on, like get with it. So that pulls me back and it reminds me that it's not as long as it's going to be, you know? So, and also when you were talking and you were giving some examples a little earlier on about habits that maybe are not supporting those initial goals, you know, maybe that extra glass of wine, maybe that extra purchase that you picked up when you went for one thing and came home with another. Maybe saying yes to one more thing on your schedule, maybe holding on to that relationship that's not, you know, maybe that person's not helping you reach these new goals, these new habits. So we almost really have to approach it like there might be habits that we have to declutter to make space for those new habits. Because if we don't have space to add in those new habits on a day-to-day basis, then of course it's going to feel overwhelming. Of course it's going to feel like I can't possibly add one more thing. Well, then let's step back and let's see what are those habits that are in place. And you said it, the habits really are something that we're not even thinking about.
Yeah.
So we do have to get mindful on it. We have to stop. We have to really take a look. What are we doing? How are we filling our time? And what's not supporting us right now? And then we're creating more space to bring in those habits. And it's not going to feel so heavy because you have the space to do it. You have the space to tweak it, change it. You know, maybe it's 5 minutes this day, 10 minutes that day, but you're creating that space able to do it. So thank you, Kate. Habits are such an important part of really embracing a life of less clutter. Yeah. It is really how you stay on track. And the more habits that you can build that support that decluttered lifestyle, the easier it's going to get. And the stronger that decluttering muscle is going to get. So, Kate, I forgot to warn you, but what I like to ask my podcast guests are to think about something that you have let go. And I would love if you could think about what was a habit that you decluttered to make space for a new one. And then also really in terms of just in general, was there anything you've ever learned to let go of? And I have already heard you give some examples, some tangible, some non-tangible examples of things that you have let go of in order to really make those goals with souls so much more approachable and achievable. So the one, what was a habit that you decluttered to make space for a new habit? And two, what was something physical or non-physical that you could let go of that made space in your life?
Oh, Maggie, I love this question so much. Okay, so I would say that a habit that I decluttered was revenge bedtime procrastination. With my friend Monica Packer over at About Progress, she's taught all about that on her show, and she's an expert. I brought her in to teach my community on it, and I realized that I was doing it. And so revenge bedtime procrastination is when you get to the end of your day and you get your kids down and house is put to bed and all of that, and you're like, gosh, I haven't had any time for myself today. So you stay up really late watching something on Netflix. Nothing wrong with that, but you're not being intentional about it. And so you stay up too late, which means you don't get good sleep, and you're starting off the next day like already feeling yucky because you're like, I'm tired. I didn't get good sleep. Like, yes, I got time to myself, but it wasn't super fulfilling, right? So to me, for me, getting rid of revenge bedtime procrastination was huge because now I make time for myself to nurture myself, to pour into myself, even amidst being a mom, being an entrepreneur. You know, my husband also works from home, so we get to nurture our relationship like during the day and have lunches together, right? I wear a lot of different hats, but I still make time for myself during the day so that when I get to the end of the day, I don't feel completely depleted. In fact, I've already spent a lot of the day nurturing myself, going for walks, drinking water, reading a book for fun, things like that. So that way, when I get to the end of the day, I don't feel like I want to stay up super late because it doesn't serve future me, but I have already poured into myself. So that desire to have that time for me is a lot smaller because I prioritize that time for myself. So getting rid of that habit was really helpful because now I have an evening routine that is just so much better. It's so much better. I give myself permission I go to bed early. It's hilarious. Like my best friend will text my husband all the time and she'll be like, is Kate alive? Because she hasn't answered my text message because it's like 8:30 at night. And he's like, no, she's alive. She's just already in bed. And so part of that is like some nights during the week, I go to bed really early. Like I get my kids down and I'm like, I'm tired. And staying up to watch an hour or two of TV actually isn't serving my best interest right now.
Well, good to know that there's a name to that.
Yes.
Because I know we're all guilty. I'm guilty.
It's, oh my gosh.
I love that. Yeah.
And it's not to say that it never happens, right? Like we are humans and things exist on a continuum, right?
Sure.
So sometimes these habits that are less desirable when we find ourselves in times of stress, they might start to come back because they're a familiar coping mechanism, right? So just to be kind to yourself, know that like have the awareness around like, oh, isn't that interesting? This is happening again. And think back on your day. Where am I feeling a little unfulfilled or overtaxed or overstimulated or overwhelmed, right? So that for me was really helpful. And then when I think about something that I've let go of, for me, the biggest one is perfectionism. I used to get stuck in perfectionism. Like I wouldn't take action on things because I was like, well, if I can't do it the best it's ever been done ever in the history of man right out the gate, I'm not even going to try. And like, what a ridiculous concept, right? In hindsight, I'm like, oh, sweet baby Kate, what were you thinking, right? But, I was I've raised in such a way that perfection was the standard. It wasn't the like guiding light or the inspiration, something that perfection doesn't actually exist. So like, but I was expected to be perfect. And so I have spent, I'm 35. I've spent a good 15 years deconstructing these perfectionist beliefs and giving myself permission to try things and to be like, oh, did I enjoy this? Do I want to keep doing it? Or sometimes more importantly, like, oh, that was interesting. It's not for me. And that's okay too. But asking myself the question, and I learned this from Jenna Kutcher's podcast, the Gold Digger podcast years ago. She did an episode where she encouraged listeners to think about what is the worst that could happen if you try this thing and you commit to it. What is the worst case scenario? And if you can live with that, it's worth trying. And so for me, I heard that right before I started my podcast. And I remember being like, I had it on my heart to start the podcast, but I felt a little, I don't know, self-conscious, like I'm great at talking. I could talk to myself all day long. So I don't know what I was hung up on, but I just had this fear of like, I'm going to be judged or it's not going to resonate or, whatever it is. And I had to ask myself like, well, what's the worst that could happen? The worst that happens is I try it and I'm terrible and I never get any better. And then I stop. And then I can look back and decide, what did I learn from that experience? And then try something different, right? Instead, I recorded and I was like, okay, I think I figured this out. And I just kept showing up and kept showing up. And now we're like 350 episodes in. And it's one of my favorite things I get to do is be a podcaster, right? And so that would have never happened if I had stayed in that perfectionist mode of like, well, I have to get the intro perfect and I have to edit out every right? Like if we try to be perfect, it's never going to happen.
Yeah. Those are great examples.
It's still a process. Sometimes my perfectionist voice pops back up and I'm like, oh, hey, you, what you doing here?
Absolutely. And believe it or not, perfectionism, it might be episode 3 or 4 of this podcast. That is a reason a lot of people don't get started.
Yeah.
And like you said, it's just, even if something happens out of taking that action, you're just going to be one step ahead. So those are great examples. And I appreciate you letting me put you on the spot for those questions. But thank you, Kate, so much for sharing that. I'm excited to have you back because I would love to dive even deeper into something that is so important in embracing and maintaining a life of less clutter and more you. So, Kate, where can everyone find you so that they can get started on setting their intentions for their habits ahead?
Oh, thank you so much. So I am not the only Kate House in the world. Surprise, surprise. So everywhere I am Miss Kate House. So MS and then Kate House, HOUSE, just like a house. So on Instagram at Miss Kate House, my website is misskatehouse.com. And then my podcast where Maggie has been a guest is the Live by Design podcast with Kate House. And I would love to, if it's okay, gift your community an all access pass to my Goals with Soul Summit that I hosted earlier in 2024. And if you want to use code MOREYOU, then you can grab the all access pass for free. It's a $97 value. I'll give you guys the link for it. But if you like listening to podcast episodes, which if you're here, I'm assuming you do, and you want to kind of explore this idea of how do I live with more intention and joy and purpose, it's a podcast summit. So basically you get 24 free podcast episodes that you can just do a little habit pairing with, pop them in your earbuds and get to decluttering and do it all at the same time.
Thank you. Amazing, Kate. So I'll include all of that in the show notes. So if you are driving, no need to stop and write that down. I'll include it in the show notes. And remember to take that 5 minutes to really work on those intentions so that you have that head start of igniting some new habits. So thank you, Kate, and I am sure we will chat with you soon. And thank you, everybody else. I will chat with you as you continue to live with less clutter and more you. Thank you for tuning in. If after listening, you have gained just a boost of motivation to start thinking about your clutter and taking action to clear it, then I would love for you to subscribe to the podcast so you don't miss an episode and leave a rating and review so we can continue to grow and inspire others just like you. In the meantime, I'll be here cheering you on your next step forward with living with less clutter and more you.